What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the March 2018 format. We just had two major events come to a close this past weekend. YCS Bochum, which was the largest YCS Europe has ever seen, and I think tied for second or third in terms of the largest main premier event we've ever had in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. There was also the UDS Winter Invitational, which took place in Sacramento, California, which is a very significant event as well, because both of these events are going to dictate how the meta is going to shape up moving forward, and since YCS Atlanta took place the weekend prior, we can start to notice some trends and patterns and see how the meta is shaping up. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons as always. So big shout outs today to Cinnamon Toast Crunch, to David, to Hector, to Turond, as well as Jake. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong, and if you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to start off with the pie chart for the top 32 breakdown of YCS Bochum, because this is the biggest event. Like I said, 1,900 players. That is absolutely phenomenal in terms of representation, and there's a lot to discuss when looking at this pie chart. I think the biggest thing that stands out is the fact that Pendulum Magician actually did not have near the representation that it did in comparison to YCS Atlanta. YCS Atlanta, Pendulum Magician took up about over 50% of the top cut, whereas when you look at this, it's only taking up about just over 25%. Now, there also were two Pendulum FDK decks, which do also fall into that category as well, so it's a little bit above 25%, but I do like how the commentators and the crew that was just running the show did separate and differentiate Pendulum FDK from traditional Pendulum Magician. Now, Pendulum FDK is where I want to start the discussion, because this is kind of where a lot of people were apprehensive about where this format was going to go, because in the top 16 of YCS Atlanta, there was one Pendulum FDK deck, and that's kind of where this whole deck originated, and myself and a lot of other people were very, very worried for how this format was going to kind of evolve or devolve, if you want to look at it that way, with the introduction of this FDK into the format. But to my surprise, and I think to a lot of people's surprise, Pendulum FDK did not perform as well as a lot of people might have anticipated. I believe in the original 1,900 player breakdown, about 5% of the players were actually playing Pendulum FTK variants. But when you got down to this top cut, only 2 of the top 32 managed to make it in, and even then they fell off in the early rounds of the top 32, not even making it anywhere close to taking first place. Now, the biggest thing I want to basically heed when it comes to this is just because Pendulum FDK did not win the event, or it didn't have a massive showing and basically underperformed, not only for YCS Bochum, but also for the UDS Invitational as well, that does not mean that Pendulum FDK does not need to be addressed. Just Konami, if you're watching this video, just hit Lyrilusk Independent Nightingale to 0. We have one of the most diverse formats we've ever seen, and a lot of people are loving the game in the position that it's currently in. So by banning the FTK and just how degenerate and asinine it is in this game, you're gonna make a lot of people happy, because it seems like, and maybe this is just my impression, a lot of people are in love with this format, and maybe that contributed to the fact that YCS Bochum had the turnout that it did, is because the ban list is in the position that it's in. Basically, players can play so many different decks, and I think that might have contributed to why it had such a massive turnout. So just ban Lyrilusk Independent Nightingale, and let's get on with having a wonderful format. I'm not going to touch too much on Pendulum Magician, because, as we know, it still is the best deck of the format, purely based on representation alone. Interestingly enough, though, it didn't win the event, but it still has the highest numbers in terms of representation, both when you're looking at the overall scope of the field, as well as the top 32 breakdown as well. And that also applies to the UDS Invitational, which we'll get to that pie chart a little bit later. One innovation, I guess, was the fact that someone was playing Utopic Zexal. That ended up taking second place at YCS Bochum, kind of in a very similar fashion. It's not an FTK, but if you assemble Utopic Zexal to the field, your opponent's not going to be able to play the game, so you've basically sealed yourself the win just off that alone. So a cute little innovation there. I'm not sure if that will take off, but I thought it was really interesting nonetheless. What I do want to talk about, though, is True Draco, because at YCS Atlanta, True Draco underperformed significantly, but I think a lot of players realize how good of a matchup that True Draco has against Pendulum Magician, going first or second, second, and that's why we see it taking 5 slots of the top 32. The thing is, when you're playing True Draco, is you can play cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance, like Skill Drain, like Monarch's Erupt, all these floodgate cards that are just going to completely destroy and obliterate Pendulum Magician if you go first, and kind of are like auto-win cards if you want to look at them that way, because if they don't have the purple Poison Magician, or if they're not main decking something like Cosmic Cyclone, they're basically just screwed. And then going second, the deck is also very good because you also have the ability to tribute off your trap cards to pop stuff like Vortex Dragon, Naruto, things like that, summon your Maiden or whatever, and then pretty much establish a masterpiece, and you're going to be in a very good position. However, I think the biggest innovation when it came to True Draco was the inclusion of Amano Iwado, and big shoutouts to Kevin Truong on this one because he was messaging me and he was the innovator, I think, of this card when it came to the Fort Worth Regional a couple weeks back, which was about 400 players, and I highly underestimated this card because when I saw this, I'm like, oh, it's another Inspector Border, you know, that's pretty cool. But the fact that when you play this card, it essentially stuns the entire Pendulum Magician player's board, which is something Inspector Border can't do, gives the deck so much power because then you can get all the draw power you want, you can start popping your opponent's stuff left and right without them being able to respond at all, because Amano Iwado will basically protect you from doing so. It's a very, very solid inclusion in the deck. Now, when it came to YCS Bochum, some players were split onto which one to play, Inspector Border or Amano Iwado, but both cards saw play, and I think that helped contribute to True Draco's success. The interesting thing is, Trickstar actually has the 3rd highest representation, and this is both for Bochum as well as the UDS. Now, the interesting thing about Trickstar is it still managed to hang up there as the 3rd highest represented deck, and I believe it actually made the finals of the UDS Invitational if my memory serves correctly. But the interesting thing about Trickstar is the fact that I feel that with Draco on the rise and more players looking to Draco as an alternative deck to consider combating the best deck of the format, if more True Draco enters the fray, I feel like Trickstar is going to go down in representation because Masterpiece is a very difficult card for Trickstar to out. It basically, there's no way for that deck to out that card outside of something like Borreload Dragon, and even then, if your opposing Draco player sees you're trying to go into a Borreload, they're just going to pop one of your monsters, and then your only out to it is basically just been completely squandered. So I feel like because Trickstars already have a difficult time dealing with big monsters, but then dealing with a big monster that can pop your stuff and is immune to basically your entire deck, I feel like if Draco goes up, Trickstar is going to start going down. And now, it depends on how many players decide to play Draco, but I think that's definitely a correlation we might see moving forward. Trickstar is definitely still going to be in the competitive scene, but I think really just depending on how much Draco is going to exist is going to be dependent on how much Trickstar people are going to play moving forward. But then looking outside of that, out of those top 3 decks, which took up about maybe 2/3 of the top cut, there was like 9 other decks that were in the top 32. I mean, you had like 60 card Lightsworn zombie decks, you had like Invoked Mech Knight, you had Zephyra, you had Paleozoic, Burning Abyss, Gemknight FDK, I think one of those snuck in there. You've got stuff like World Chalice. World Chalice won YCS Bochum. I don't think anyone would have ever guessed World Chalice was going to win the biggest YCS Europe has ever seen, but that's what's so cool about this format. And then when you look at the UDS's pie chart in comparison as well, what's so interesting about this is that it's almost identical to the YCS Bochum one. You had a very high Pendulum Magician representation, but not too high to the point where it looks like it's an issue. You had the same number of True Draco top, you had the same number of Trickstar top, and then when you get out of that first 3 decks, then it's just like 6 other decks making the top cut, and Zephyra managed to take first place out of all of these decks that managed to make the top cut. Hell, there was a Magical Musketeer in there as well. Shoutouts to Ediception for making it all the way to the top 8, playing a deck that no one would have thought could make it that far. I think this format is absolutely phenomenal. I think there's a couple things that can be modified to make it even better. Pendulum FDK, but I think this is a really cool format because essentially, if you can find a deck that can handle Pendulum Magician's boards very well, or can just play enough cards to hate on Pendulum Magician, which isn't difficult because there's a lot of them, and if you have a deck that can effectively out a Masterpiece, you can realistically play any deck that you want as long as it fulfills those two categories. Pendulum Magician and Draco, while they are very strong decks, they're not unbeatable by any stretch of the imagination. This is a format where a lot of players have the opportunity to experiment and really get creative in finding what those decks are going to be that are really going to just surge their way to the top. And really, I mean, if World Chalice and Zephyr are going to win a YCS in this current format, then anything is absolutely possible. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this meta analysis. What decks do you think are going to pop up next? I'm so excited for the next premiere events. I can't even contain it. It's gonna be awesome. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time. 1, 2, 3.